The red warning lights flashed across the Zalani monitoring station as commander. Giwan watched the horror unfolding on his screens. The peaceful farming world of Verdania, home to millions of innocent families, was burning. Giant war machines from the Cathara Empire rolled across green fields that once grew food for entire star systems. Buildings crumbled under heavy bombardment, while terrified civilians ran for their lives. Jiwan had seen many conflicts in his years of service, but nothing like this. The Cathara didn't just conquer worlds, they destroyed everything beautiful about them. Their massive ships blocked out the sun, while ground forces herded survivors into transport ships. These people would become slaves, forced to work in terrible conditions on distant mining worlds. "Sir, our defense fleet is still 3 days away," reported his communications officer, voice shaking. "Verdania will be lost by then." Jiwan closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of helplessness. The Zalani Confederation had always been peaceful traders and farmers. They had small patrol ships, not war fleets. Against the Cathara Empire's military might, they were like children facing giants, but he had to try something, anything. "Open an emergency broadcast on all frequencies," Giwan commanded. "Send it in every direction, as far as our transmitters can reach." His officer looked confused. "Sir, there's nobody out there who can help us. Every nearby civilization fears the Cathara too much to interfere." "Just do it," Jiwan said firmly. The message went out into the vast emptiness of space. "This is Commander Jiwan of the Zalani Confederation. Our colony world of Verdania faces total destruction. The Cathara Empire is slaughtering innocent civilians. We have no military fleet strong enough to defend ourselves. If any species in the galaxy receives this transmission, we beg you, please help us. Our people are dying." The transmission traveled at light speed through the darkness between stars, carrying the desperate voice of a doomed world. Most who heard it would ignore the plea, too afraid to challenge the mighty Cathara Empire. Others would feel sympathy, but lack the power to act. But far away, in a quiet corner of the galaxy that the Cathara had never bothered to explore, the message reached Earth's deep space monitoring station. Lieutenant Minho was drinking his morning coffee when the alien transmission came through his equipment. The computer's translation program worked frantically to decode the unfamiliar language. As the meaning became clear, Minho nearly dropped his coffee cup. His hands trembled as he reached for the emergency communication button that would alert Earth's military command. The message was heartbreaking, an entire world crying out for salvation, with nowhere else to turn. What the desperate Zalani didn't know was that their plea had reached the one species in the galaxy that had sworn never to ignore such cries for help. Humanity had learned hard lessons from their own dark history. They remembered what happened when good people did nothing while evil spread across the stars. Earth's war fleets were about to answer the call. The emergency meeting room at Earth's defense headquarters buzzed with tension as Admiral Hyanwu played the alien transmission for the 5th time. The holographic display showed devastating images that made even hardened military officers look away. Entire city blocks reduced to rubble. Families carrying children through burning streets. Massive alien warships raining death from above. "This could be some kind of elaborate deception," General Sujin said, pacing around the conference table. "We've never encountered these Zalani before. How do we know this isn't bait to lure our fleet into an ambush?" Several council members nodded in agreement. Earth had spent decades building the most powerful space fleet in human history. The risk of losing it to an unknown threat seemed enormous, but Admiral Hyanwu had seen enough war to recognize genuine terror in those alien faces. "Look at their eyes," he said quietly, pointing to a refugee family on the screen. "That's real fear. Real pain. You can't fake that kind of desperation. Even if it's real, these aren't our people," another general argued. "We have a responsibility to protect Earth first." What if this is exactly what our enemies want, to draw our forces away from home? The debate continued for another hour, voices rising as the council wrestled with the decision. Some demanded more intelligence gathering, others wanted to send only a small scout force. A few suggested ignoring the transmission entirely. Admiral Hunwoo listened to every argument, then stood up slowly. The room fell silent as he activated his personal display, showing Earth's massive orbital shipyards. Hundreds of warships hung in space like sleeping giants, representing humanity's greatest technological achievement. 60 years ago, Earth barely survived its own wars, he said calmly. We swore never again would we stand by while innocent people suffered. Not on Earth, and not anywhere else. He turned to face the council directly. We have 237 combat ships, the most advanced weapons in known space, the best trained crews in the galaxy. And right now, somewhere far from here, people are dying because they have none of those things. The Admiral's voice grew stronger. Our ancestors dreamed of reaching the stars to make them a better place, not to hide behind our borders while others burn. We answer this call because it's who we are. General Sujin opened her mouth to argue again, but Admiral Hunwoo held up his hand. I'm not asking for a vote. I'm informing you of my decision as fleet commander. We launch in 6 hours. The room erupted in protests, but the Admiral was already walking toward the door. Within minutes, activation orders flashed across every human naval base. Crews ran to their ships as massive engines began warming up for the longest combat. Deployment in human history, Captain Naeon stood on the bridge of her flagship, Soul's Pride, watching the incredible sight of humanity's war fleet assembling. Ship after ship appeared from hyperspace jumps, forming the largest armada ever created. This wasn't just military might, this was humanity's conscience made manifest, ready to cross the galaxy for strangers who had nowhere else to turn. The space around Zilani Border Station Omega-7 suddenly filled with impossible light as reality itself seemed to tear open. Patrol Leader Kieran nearly fell from his chair as massive shapes began emerging from the swirling energy portals. One ship, then 10, then 50, then more than he could count. Alert status red. Kieran shouted to his crew, unknown fleet, approaching our territory. The Zilani patrol ships were tiny compared to these newcomers. Each human vessel was a masterpiece of deadly engineering, sleek hulls that seemed to absorb light, weapon arrays that hummed with barely contained power, and engines that glowed like captured stars. Their design was unlike anything in the galactic databases. Sir, there are over 200 ships. His sensor operator reported with terror in his voice. They're larger than anything the Kithara Empire has ever built. Kieran's mind raced. Had the Kithara sent reinforcements? But these ships looked nothing like the brutal, ugly war machines that the Empire preferred. These vessels had an elegant beauty that spoke of advanced technology and careful craftsmanship. Unknown fleet, you have entered Zilani Confederation. Space without permission, Kieran transmitted, trying to keep his voice steady. Identify yourselves immediately, or we will consider this an act of war. Even as he spoke, Kieran knew how ridiculous the threat sounded. His 3 patrol ships carried light weapons meant for stopping smugglers, not fighting an armada that could probably destroy entire star systems. On the bridge of Soul's Pride, Captain Naeon watched the small Zilani ships through her view screen. They looked terrified and hopelessly outgunned, exactly like the desperate people in the transmission that had brought humanity across the galaxy. Activate the translation matrix, she ordered her communications officer. Use every linguistic algorithm we have. We need to make them understand we're not their enemy. The AI worked frantically to decode the Zilani language, comparing it to thousands of known patterns and structures. Within seconds, it began producing rough translations. This is Captain Naeon of the Earth Defense Fleet, she transmitted slowly. hoping the translator could convert her words accurately. We received your distress call about the attack on Verdania. We have traveled many light years to reach you. We are here to help. The response was complete silence. Seconds stretched into a full minute as the Zalani tried to process what they had just heard. Kieran stared at his communication panel in shock, certain he had misunderstood the translation. Could you repeat that transmission? Kieran finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. We heard your call for help, Captain Nayan replied patiently. Your people are in danger from the Cathara Empire. We have come to assist in their defense. Another long silence followed. When Kieran spoke again, his voice was filled with wonder and disbelief. You actually came. Someone actually answered our message. Yes, Captain Nahan said simply. We came as fast as we could. Kieran felt tears forming in his eyes. For days, he had watched the reports from Verdania grow worse and worse. The Confederation's small fleet was still far away, and everyone knew they would arrive too late. He had given up hope that anyone in the galaxy would risk challenging the mighty Cathara Empire, but somehow, impossibly, help had arrived from the stars themselves. The hastily converted cargo bay on Zalani, border station Omega-7, now buzzed with activity as human and alien officers worked side by side. Holographic displays showed the terrifying scope of the Cathara Empire. Red dots marking conquered worlds stretched across entire sectors of the galaxy. Each dot represented billions of enslaved beings who had lost their freedom to the Empire's endless hunger for expansion. Admiral Hunwu stood before the largest display, studying battle reports that painted a grim picture. Commander Jiwan watched nervously as the human admiral absorbed decades of Cathara military data with frightening speed. Show me their typical invasion pattern. Admiral Hunwu requested. G1 activated another display, showing how the Empire conquered worlds. They always follow the same plan. First, they destroy all orbital defenses with overwhelming firepower. Then they land massive ground forces to crush any resistance. Finally, they round up survivors for slave labor. Lieutenant Colonel Min, Earth's top military analyst, leaned forward with interest. She had spent years studying human conflicts, but alien warfare was entirely new. How do planetary defenses usually respond? They try to match the Empire's strength, explained a Zalani tactical officer. They build bigger weapons, thicker armor, more ships. It never works. The Cathara always have more resources. Minjay smiled grimly. That's their first mistake. You can't beat a heavyweight by becoming a bigger heavyweight. You have to become faster, smarter, more unpredictable. The Zalani officers looked confused. Their entire military doctrine was based on defensive strength and superior firepower. The idea of using weakness as an advantage made no sense to them. Admiral Hunwu began walking around the display, examining the Empire's conquered territories. Look at this pattern. They've been using the same tactics for over a century. Massive fleets, direct assault, total destruction of resistance. It works because everyone tries to fight them the same way. But surely their experience makes them stronger, Commander Giwan asked. They've defeated hundreds of civilizations. That's exactly the problem, Lieutenant Colonel Minjay replied, pulling up Earth's military history. On our world, we learned that armies can become too successful. When you always win the same way, you stop adapting. You stop learning. You become predictable. She showed images from human conflicts, small forces defeating much larger armies through surprise, mobility, and unconventional tactics. The Cathara expect their enemies to line up in neat formations and fight honorably. They don't know how to handle opponents who refuse to play by those rules. Admiral Hunwu nodded slowly. Every report shows the same thing. The Empire relies on fear and overwhelming force. But what happens when they face someone who isn't afraid? Someone who fights back, using methods they've never encountered. The Zalani officers exchanged worried looks. One of them spoke up hesitantly. "Admiral, with all respect, the Cathara Empire has thousands of warships. Their military might has crushed every force that challenged them. Do you really believe your fleet can stand against that kind of power?" The human admiral turned to face them, his expression calm and confident. "We don't plan to stand against it. We plan to dance around it, confuse it, and tear it apart, piece by piece. The Empire's strength comes from fighting predictable enemies. We're about to show them what happens when they face humans." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. These humans weren't planning to meet the Empire in glorious battle. They were planning to fight like nothing the galaxy had ever seen before, deep in the shadows of Kithara space. Commander UNG's stealth ship drifted silently between asteroids like a hunting predator. Her vessel was painted in special coating that absorbed sensor waves, making it nearly invisible to enemy detection systems. Around her, 20 other human ships waited in perfect silence, their crews barely breathing as they prepared for the most dangerous mission of their lives. "Target confirmed," whispered Lieutenant Sulji from the sensor station. "Cathara supply. Convoy approaching. 3 massive cargo ships with light escort." These weren't random attacks. Every strike had been carefully planned to cripple the Empire's war machine. The Cathara relied on massive supply chains to feed their enormous fleets. Cut those supply lines, and even the mightiest warship became helpless. "Remember, we hit fast and disappear faster," Commander Yunji reminded her team. "No heroics, no unnecessary risks. We're ghosts. They should never even know we were there." The human ships moved with deadly precision. Magnetic mines attached themselves to the cargo ships' hulls, while hacking devices infiltrated their computer systems. Within minutes, the convoy's navigation computers were corrupted, their engines disabled, and their communication arrays destroyed. By the time the Cathara escorts realized something was wrong, the human ships had already vanished into the asteroid field, hundreds of light-years away. Fleet Admiral Vorthak stood in his command center, staring at reports that made no sense. His logistics officer's face was pale with fear as he delivered the latest news. "Sir, we've lost contact with supply convoys, Delta 7, Epsilon 12, and Gamma 5, the officer reported. "That's 12 major cargo ships in just 2 days. Our fuel and ammunition reserves are dropping dangerously low." Vorthak's massive fists clenched in rage. The Cathara Empire had conquered half the galaxy through brute force and superior firepower. They had never faced an enemy that struck from the shadows and melted away like mist. "Send hunter squadrons to patrol every supply route," he commanded. "Deploy sensor networks throughout our territory. Find these cowards and make them pay for daring to challenge the Empire." But the human infiltration teams were always one step ahead. They had studied Cathara patrol patterns for weeks, learning their habits and weaknesses. When the enemy sent hunters, the humans were already gone. When they deployed sensors, the humans found different routes. Meanwhile, back at the Zalani station, Captain Dong Yun's engineering teams worked around the clock to prepare their own surprises. The Zalani watched in amazement as human technicians installed advanced weapon systems on their defensive platforms. "These energy cannons are 3 times more powerful than anything we have," said Chief Engineer Harem, examining the human technology with wonder. "How did your species develop such advanced weapons?" Captain Dong Yun smiled grimly. "We've had a lot of practice fighting wars. Unfortunately, we learned early that sometimes the only way to protect innocent people is to become very good at destroying those who threaten them." The Zalani had always been peaceful traders and farmers. The idea of such advanced military technology was both impressive and terrifying. These humans had clearly seen terrible conflicts to develop such sophisticated ways of warfare as the preparations continued. The trap was slowly closing around the Kithara Empire. Their supply lines were being systematically destroyed, their intelligence networks were compromised, and they had no idea that the greatest military force they had ever faced was preparing to teach them a lesson they would never forget. The bridge of Admiral Vorthak's flagship Eternal Dominion was a scene of chaos and despair. Sparks flew from damaged control panels while smoke filled the air. The massive warship that had once struck fear into entire star systems now limped through space with half its engines destroyed and weapons systems offline. Vorthak stood among the wreckage of his command center, his uniform torn and blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. Around him, his officers worked frantically to keep their dying ship operational. The impossible had happened. The mighty Kithara Empire had been crushed by an enemy they had never even heard of before today. Status report, Vorthak demanded, though he already knew the answer would be terrible. Sir, we've lost contact with 70% of the fleet, his tactical officer reported with a shaking voice. The surviving ships are scattered across 3 star systems. Most are too damaged to fight. The admiral stared at the tactical display, showing the aftermath of the battle. Red dots marked the wreckage of Kithara ships floating in space, like broken toys. For over a century, his fleets had been unstoppable. Today, they had been destroyed by humans, using tactics that seemed to come from some military genius beyond their understanding. How is this possible? Vorthak whispered to himself. We had superior numbers, superior firepower, superior experience. But the humans had fought like nothing the Empire had ever faced. They attacked from impossible angles, used the battlefield itself as a weapon, and coordinated their movements with precision that seemed almost supernatural. Every time the Kithara tried to respond with traditional tactics, the humans had already moved to exploit their weaknesses. On the human flagship Soul's Pride, Communications Officer Taiho looked up from his console with surprise. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Kithara flagship. They're requesting to open negotiations. Admiral Hunwoo didn't even look up from the battle damage reports he was reviewing. His fleet had won a decisive victory, but the cost had been significant. Several human ships were severely damaged, and he had lost good people in the fighting. What do they want to negotiate about? He asked coldly. Taiho listened to his earpiece for a moment. They're offering territorial concessions, tribute payments, and exclusive trading rights if we withdraw from their space. The admiral's expression hardened. Around the bridge, his officers waited to see how humanity would respond to the Empire's first attempt at diplomacy in over a century. Send them this message, Admiral Hunwoo said, his voice carrying the authority of Earth itself. Tell them that Earth doesn't negotiate with slavers. We don't want their territory or their tribute. We want every enslaved world freed immediately. We want reparations paid to the billions of beings they've oppressed. And we want guarantees that their empire of cruelty ends today. Taiho's eyes widened. Sir, they'll never agree to those terms. That would mean the complete destruction of their power structure. Then they'll face the complete destruction of their fleet, the admiral replied without hesitation. Commander Juan, who had been watching the exchange in stunned silence, felt his understanding of these humans shift once again. He had thought they were simply another military power, seeking conquest through superior force. But now he realized something far more significant was happening. These humans hadn't crossed the galaxy for territory or resources. They had come because they genuinely cared about the suffering of strangers. And now, with the power to dictate any terms they wanted, they were demanding justice for the oppressed rather than profit for themselves. The galaxy had never seen anything like humanity before. The refugee camp on Tyranni's Prime stretched 4 kilometers across what had once been a beautiful valley. Thousands of beings from dozens of different species huddled together under temporary shelters, their eyes still holding the fear of decades spent as Kithara slaves. Many had forgotten what freedom even meant after generations of brutal oppression. Captain Sungmin walked through the camp, coordinating the massive relief effort that human ships had brought from Earth. Medical tents treated diseases that the Kithara had ignored for years. Food distribution centers provided the first decent meals these people had tasted in decades. Engineering teams worked around the clock to restore basic infrastructure that the Empire had deliberately destroyed to keep populations helpless. Status report, Captain Sungmin requested from his aide, as they passed a group of children playing with toys that human soldiers had carved from scrap metal. Medical teams have treated over 15,000 patients in the last week, Lieutenant Yun reported. We've established clean water systems in 47 camps, and the agricultural specialists say they can have food production restored within 6 months. But the most challenging work wasn't physical reconstruction, it was helping people remember how to be free. Major Arium's teams had the delicate job of establishing new governments among species that had lived under tyranny for so long that they had forgotten how democracy worked. We don't understand, said Elder Kazith, a reptilian being whose people had been enslaved for over 2 centuries. Who will tell us what to do? Who will make the decisions for our world? Major Arium sat patiently in the circle of nervous planetary representatives. You will make your own decisions. That's what freedom means. You choose your own leaders, make your own laws, decide your own future. The concept was so foreign to them that many began crying. The idea that they could actually have a say in their own lives seemed impossible after generations of being treated like property. Meanwhile, on the mining world of Kethros, Lieutenant Ji Yoon supervised the distribution of medical supplies to former slaves. The beings here were in terrible condition, malnourished, injured from dangerous work, and psychologically broken from years of abuse. An elderly being, with scars covering his arms, approached the young human officer hesitantly. His species had been enslaved so long that few even remembered their original homeworld. Human, the being said in broken galactic common. I must ask something that confuses me greatly. What is it? Lieutenant Ji-yoon replied gently, kneeling down to meet the being's eyes. You have powerful ships, advanced weapons. You defeated the mighty empire that we thought could never fall. You could take anything you want from our worlds, our resources, our labor, our obedience. But instead, you give us medicine, food, freedom. The being's voice trembled with emotion. Why do you help us when you could simply become our new masters? Lieutenant. Ji-yoon was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to explain something that seemed so simple to humans, but was apparently revolutionary to the rest of the galaxy. Because it's the right thing to do, she said finally. Your people called for help, and we answered that call. We didn't come here to conquer, or to take anything from you. We came because innocent people were suffering, and we had the power to stop that suffering. The being stared at her in amazement. Around them, other freed slaves had gathered to listen to the conversation. Many had tears streaming down their faces as they began to understand that these humans truly expected nothing in return for their liberation. Back on the Zalani station, Commander Jiwon watched reports from across former Cathara space with growing wonder. Human ships were sharing their most advanced technology freely, medical equipment, agricultural tools, manufacturing systems, asking for nothing except the promise that these worlds would remain free and democratic. The galaxy had never seen anything like humanity's approach to victory. The newly constructed station New Hope floated in neutral space, its gleaming corridors filled with the most diverse gathering the galaxy had ever seen. Representatives from 43 different species walked side by side, beings with scales, fur, feathers, and forms that defied easy description. 6 months ago, most of these worlds had been enslaved by the Cathara Empire. Today, they were about to make history. Admiral Hunwoo stood at the podium in the Great Assembly Hall, looking out at faces that showed hope for the first time in generations. The Cathara delegates sat in a separate section. Their once proud warriors, now wearing simple civilian clothes, as part of their surrender terms. The empire that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries was being dissolved, its territory divided among the liberated peoples. 6 months ago, a desperate voice called out into the darkness of space. Admiral Heinwu began, his words translated into dozens of languages simultaneously. The Zilani Confederation faced annihilation, and in their darkest hour, they sent a plea for help to anyone who might listen. Commander Jiwan, now wearing the insignia of Alliance Admiral on his uniform, felt tears forming in his eyes as he remembered that terrible day. His people had been so certain they would die alone, abandoned by a galaxy, too afraid to challenge the Empire's might. That message traveled across the void and reached Earth, the Admiral continued. It touched human hearts because we recognized something universal. The cry of innocence under threat, the plea of the helpless, facing overwhelming evil. We came, not because we knew you, but because we knew what was right. The assembly erupted in applause that lasted several minutes. Beings who had never dreamed of freedom were now celebrating the formation of the Galactic Liberation Alliance, a coalition dedicated to protecting the weak and preventing the rise of future empires. Today, we sign more than a treaty, Admiral Heinwu said as the applause died down. We forge an alliance built not on conquest or domination, but on a simple principle, that no being anywhere should suffer under tyranny when others have the power to help. One by one, the representatives approached the signing table. The Zilani Admiral Jiwan signed first, his hand steady, despite the emotion he felt. Representatives from the liberated mining worlds, agricultural planets, and industrial systems followed. Each signature represented millions of beings choosing freedom over fear. The former Katara officials signed last, agreeing to the terms that would transform their military empire into a collection of independent, democratic worlds. Some looked bitter about their defeat, but others seemed almost relieved that the burden of maintaining their brutal system was finally over. As the ceremony concluded, Admiral Jiwan joined Admiral Heinwu at the observation deck overlooking the station's docking bays. Hundreds of ships from the new alliance floated in formation, their diverse designs reflecting the rich variety of species now working together. What happens now? Admiral Jiwan asked. The Kithara Empire is broken, but the galaxy is vast. There could be other threats out there. Admiral Heinwu pointed to a group of human exploration ships preparing to depart for unknown regions of space. Their mission was peaceful exploration, but their crews were ready to answer any calls for help they might encounter. We keep listening, he replied simply. Somewhere out there, another species might be facing what your people faced. Another world might be crying out for salvation. Another innocent civilization might be calling into the darkness, hoping someone will care enough to answer. The human ships began moving away from the station, their engines glowing as they prepared for hyperspace jumps to unexplored systems. Behind them, the new alliance stood ready to support any rescue mission that might be needed. Admiral Jiwan watched them go with a smile. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. When good people called for help, humanity would always answer. The age of empires built on fear and conquest was ending. The age of liberation had begun. In the vast darkness of space, Earth's promise echoed across the stars. No cry for help would go unanswered.